When Scott was being interviewed by the detectives that night, he made the statement that David Coffin had been shot. And so the detective immediately said, well, nobody knew how he died. How do you know that he had been shot? Scott says that he first heard it from Megan.
How do we know that Megan told Scott this?
Megan was at the site. She then went to the next door neighbors and she called Scott. And she said that David had been shot.
So you bring Scott Davis to homicide for questioning. At what point is it that you decide that this may be our suspect in the Coffin murder?
When he told Rick that Scott had been shot.
Who's Rick?
Rick's my partner.
Now, you know, this is a huge point of contention with the family. How do you know that Megan didn't tell Scott that David had been shot?
Because Rick went and asked her.
Uh-huh.
She said no.
They lost over 50 pieces of evidence. Have you ever had a case like this before?
No, I've never had a case like that.
Not having the evidence, it's not an equal playing field.
Not everybody takes care of their evidence like they should.
I mean, this is...
How did you know that David Coffin was shot before police did?
Megan called me at 12:18 a.m. and said exactly this. Scott, David's dead. He's been shot.
Are you sure that's the way it happened?
I am more sure about that than anything in my life. I told him this. I didn't burn his house down and I didn't shoot it. But detectives made it very clear repeatedly that that was information that nobody should have had because they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
You have 1 minute left.
Okay, Scott, I have one question that I have to ask you, and I have to know your honest answer. Did you kill David Coffin?
I didn't like him, but I didn't hate him, and I didn't want to kill him. I did not have anything to do with his death. Period.
Police testified that Scott knew the victim was shot in the head before they did. I'm meeting with a guy who used to be married to Megan's best friend. He says he knows how Scott found out. What was Scott like as a person?
Scott was very ambitious, smart guy.
What was Megan like?
She was a very attractive individual. She wanted the nice life.
Tell me about the call that you received the night that David Coffin's home was set on fire.
When the call came in, my wife at the time, Jen, is upstairs. It's late, and it was Megan.
And what did she say?
You know, David's been shot in the head. She's, oh my God, David's been murdered. I'm standing next to Jen listening to this whole thing. And she even asked her, how do you know? You know, how do you know?
How did Megan respond?
Well, she was frantic. She's just going back and forth on this, he's been shot, he's been shot. But she doesn't come out and say exactly how she knows it. She just continues to repeat it.
So if the first time that Scott speaks to Megan that night is about 10 minutes later, then according to your recollection, Megan already knew.
She knew something. I don't even believe the coroner released that information until several days after this. How does she know this? I still sit back and say, how do you know this?
Scott Davis, he was an all-American kid. Bright, good-looking. He even ran for governor of California.
But now you two are fighting for his freedom. And you gave us 5 leads that you believed would set Scott free. We've looked into those leads, and here are the results of our investigation.
Your first lead was that 70 pieces of evidence went missing, and that any one of these could have exonerated Scott. So I reached out to a former manager at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and he says you were right, even though about 50 pieces of evidence went missing, not 70. Either way, it doesn't make it that much better. Among the items missing included the alleged murder weapon and latent fingerprints. I asked him how this could have happened, and it sounded like it came down to a bureaucratic mess. So as a defense attorney, I find it absolutely outrageous that this ever even happened. We agree this is a very good lead.
How does that make you feel?
Furious.
It's gone forever. So you can't that can never be rectified.
Your next lead was that Scott couldn't have set David Coffin's Porsche on fire. You said that he was at work on the other side of town when it was discovered. The prosecution said that it was possible that Scott set the fire with some sort of timing device. So I reached out to an arson expert to see if that could be the case. After looking at these pictures of David's burnt car, he said absolutely not. He says the fire was set by a splash and dash, meaning it was set from the outside. So a timing device couldn't have worked.
Right.
But keep in mind, there's no proof that the person who set this fire is also the murderer.
Let's move on to the next lead. Now, the detectives who interviewed Scott said that there was one piece of information that made him the prime suspect. He seemed to know how David Coffin died, even before they did. And as you can see from these pictures from the crime scene, Coffin's body was so unrecognizable, rescue workers accidentally walked over it. When Scott said he didn't shoot him, their ears perked up. Both of you told us that Scott got that information because Megan told him the night of the fire. I spoke to a guy named Michael Janikova, and his wife at the time was Megan's best friend. Michael told us that at 12:08 a.m., Megan called his wife and told her that David's house had burnt down and that David had been shot in the head. 10 minutes later, Megan called Scott. Now, his wife, Mrs. Janikova at the time, when she took the stand, she seemed unsure about when Megan actually made that call. But two friends of David Coffin were at the scene, and they testified that they heard Megan on the phone with someone telling them that Coffin had been shot.
We tried to get Megan's side of the story. She wouldn't talk to us, but in court, she first testified that she did not tell Scott that David had been shot. But then she testified that she didn't know. There are a lot of conflicting stories, but overall, I think this is a solid lead.
When he told me that the detectives were taking him down there, I advised him to get a lawyer. And his answer was, I don't need one. I didn't do anything wrong, so why shouldn't I go down there by myself?